The wedding bells tolled under a slate-gray sky, their chimes echoing through the sprawling Georgia estate, where magnolias drooped as if mourning what was to come. It was June 1992, and the air was thick with humidity and anticipation. The bride, Elizabeth Carver, radiant in her ivory gown, lifted a crystal goblet to her lips, her smile faltering as the wine touched her tongue. A sharp metallic tang lingered unnoticed by the jubilant guests clinking glasses around her. Within moments, her breath hitched, her face paled, and she crumpled to the ground. The goblet rolling across the polished oak floor, its contents staining the wood like blood. The crowd gasped, frozen, as the joyous day shattered into chaos. Elizabeth's eyes, wide with confusion, locked onto a figure in the shadows. A woman in a simple black dress, her face unreadable, her hands trembling ever so slightly. That woman was Clara, the Carver family's housekeeper, a descendant of enslaved people who had toiled on this very land generations ago. And in that moment, as Elizabeth's pulse faded, Clara's dark secret began to unravel. What could drive someone to such a calculated act of vengeance on a day meant for celebration? What hidden wounds festered beneath the surface of this picturesque southern estate, where old money and older sins intertwined? The truth, buried deep in the shadows of the human mind, is far more unsettling than you might imagine. This is not just a story of poison and death. It's a descent into the fractured psyche of a woman pushed beyond the edge, where justice and madness blur into something unrecognizable. What you're about to uncover will leave you questioning the limits of loyalty, the weight of history, and the terrifying power of a mind bent on retribution. Every detail of this case, rooted in the haunting legacy of the American South, reveals a truth so disturbing it's been whispered about for decades, locked away in the memories of those who dared not speak it aloud. Did Clara act alone, or was she a pawn in a larger web of secrets? Could a single act of vengeance erase centuries of pain, or did it only deepen the wounds? Stay with us until the end, because the answers will shake you to your core, forcing you to confront the fragility of morality and the darkness that lurks in even the most ordinary hearts. This story isn't just a glimpse into a chilling psychiatric case. It's a mirror held up to the human condition, reflecting how close any of us might be to crossing an unthinkable line. The mind, after all, is a labyrinth, and Clara's was a maze of grief, rage, and unspoken truths. To join us on this journey into the unknown, hit that like button to ensure more people uncover the hidden depths of stories like this one. In the comments, leave the phrase, "I'm ready to discover the truth about this story," to show you're part of a community unafraid to face the shadows. By doing so, you're not just watching. You're stepping into a collective search for answers, connecting with others who seek to understand what lies beneath the surface of the human soul. Thank you for daring to explore with us. Prepare yourself, because what comes next contains a key revelation that will forever change the way you see the human mind. The chaos of the wedding day lingered in the air like smoke, the once vibrant estate now cloaked in an eerie silence. Guests had scattered, their celebratory toasts replaced by hushed whispers and fearful glances. Paramedics wheeled Elizabeth Carver's lifeless body away, her ivory gown stained with the wine that had betrayed her. The police cordoned off the grand dining hall, where the crystal goblet lay shattered, its jagged edges glinting under the chandelier's light. Clara stood motionless in the corner, her eyes fixed on the floor, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles paled. To the officers, she was just the housekeeper, unseen, unremarkable, a fixture of the Carver estate as much as the antique furniture. But beneath her composed exterior, a storm raged, one that had been brewing for years, perhaps even generations. Clara had worked for the Carvers for nearly 2 decades, her presence as constant as the Georgia sun. She was 42, with a face that bore the quiet strength of someone who had endured more than they spoke of. Born into a family whose roots tangled with the estate's brutal history, Clara was the great-granddaughter of enslaved people who had toiled on this very land. The Carvers, descendants of plantation owners, wore their wealth like a badge of honor, their lineage a point of pride in Savannah's high society. To them, Clara was invisible, her labor expected, her silence assumed. But Clara saw everything, their arrogance, their secrets, the way they spoke of their ancestors' legacy without a trace of shame. And she remembered. Years earlier, when Clara was first hired, she found a leather-bound journal hidden in the attic, its pages brittle and yellowed. It belonged to her great-grandmother, Eliza, who had been born into slavery on the Carver plantation in 1840. The journal's entries were sparse, written in a trembling hand, recounting not just the physical toil but the soul-crushing indignities, the beatings, the stolen children, the moments of resistance crushed under the weight of power. One entry stood out, dated 1863, just before emancipation. "They take everything, our bodies, our names, our hope. But they cannot take my will. One day they will pay." Clara read those words until they burned into her memory, a vow that echoed through time. She carried the journal with her, hidden in her small room at the edge of the estate, a reminder of the blood that stained the Carver's wealth. Elizabeth. The bride had been kind in her own way, offering Clara a polite smile, a rare thank you for her work. But kindness, Clara knew, was a thin veil over the truth. Elizabeth was a Carver, heir to a fortune built on suffering, and her wedding was a celebration of that legacy. The preparations had consumed the household for months, with Clara overseeing every detail, polishing silver, arranging flowers, pouring wine. She moved through the estate like a ghost, her presence unnoticed but essential. Yet as the wedding day approached, something shifted in her. Her movements grew deliberate, her gaze sharper. She began to linger in the kitchen, studying the bottles of wine, the herbs, the powders. No one noticed the small vial she tucked into her apron, its contents odorless, tasteless, deadly. The police began their questioning, their focus on the guests, the caterers, the florist, anyone but Clara. She answered their routine queries with practiced calm, her voice steady, her eyes downcast. But inside, her mind churned. She hadn't planned for Elizabeth to die so quickly, so publicly. The poison was meant to be subtle, a slow unraveling that would mirror the quiet erosion of her own life. Yet as she watched the paramedics fail to revive Elizabeth, a strange calm settled over her. It wasn't joy nor regret. It was the weight of something long suppressed finally breaking free. But what had driven Clara to this point? What had pushed her from silent resentment to an act so final? The answer lay not just in her own life, but in the whispers of the past that refused to stay buried. As the officers moved on to other suspects, Clara slipped back into the kitchen, her hands brushing against the vial still hidden in her apron. She knew the truth would come for her eventually, but for now she was still invisible, still underestimated. The estate, with its polished floors and grand portraits, seemed to watch her, its walls holding secrets older than anyone alive. Clara's act was not just her own. It was the culmination of a history that had never been reconciled, a wound that had festered across generations. And as the investigation deepened, the first cracks in the Carver family's pristine facade began to show, hinting at truths even they had buried. The investigation unfolded like a slow-moving fog over the Carver estate, enveloping everything in a haze of suspicion and unspoken accusations. Detectives from the Savannah Police Department combed through the grounds, their notebooks filling with details that seemed mundane at first glance, but hinted at deeper fissures. The family patriarch, Harlan Carver, a stern man in his late 60s with a silver mane and a voice like gravel, paced the veranda, his cigar smoke curling into the evening air. He dismissed the idea of foul play initially, insisting it must have been a tragic accident, perhaps tainted wine from the vineyard, or an allergic reaction gone unnoticed. But the toxicology report delivered 2 days later shattered that illusion. Arsenic, the coroner confirmed, in lethal amounts. Undetectable to the palate but devastating to the body. Harlan's face hardened, his eyes narrowing as he realized this was no mishap. It was deliberate, a shadow cast over his daughter's final day. Clara continued her duties amid the turmoil, her routine a shield against the growing scrutiny. She prepared meals for the grieving family, laundered linen stained with the remnants of the wedding, and tended to the gardens where wilted flowers now mocked the celebration. But in the quiet hours when the house slept uneasily, Clara retreated to her room. The journal of her great-grandmother Eliza opened before her. The pages seemed to pulse with life, each word a thread connecting past to present. Eliza's accounts grew more vivid in Clara's mind, not just as history but as a living echo. She imagined Eliza's hands calloused from labor, writing by candlelight, her spirit unbroken despite the chains. Clara traced the faded ink, feeling a kinship that transcended time, a shared burden of invisibility, of being reduced to mere function in the eyes of those who held power. As the days passed, The detectives delved into the family's history, interviewing staff and relatives. Harlan's wife, Margaret, a frail woman with porcelain skin and a distant gaze, spoke in whispers, her words laced with denial. She painted Elizabeth as the perfect daughter, engaged to a promising young lawyer from Atlanta, their union a merger of old Southern lineages. But beneath Margaret's composure lurked a tremor, a hint of secrets long suppressed. The investigators noted inconsistencies, small at first, like the way Margaret avoided mentioning Clara by name, referring to her only as the help. It was as if Clara's existence was an afterthought, yet her fingerprints were everywhere in the household's daily rhythm. One evening, as rain pattered against the windows, a young detective named Ellis Thompson decided to question Clara more thoroughly. He found her in the attic, sorting through boxes of old family heirlooms, silverware, faded photographs, tattered ledgers from the plantation era. The attic was a repository of forgotten things, dust motes dancing in the dim light filtering through a cracked skylight. Clara didn't startle at his approach. She merely set down a tarnished frame and met his gaze. Ellis, with his earnest face and notepad in hand, asked about her relationship with Elizabeth. Clara's response was measured, her voice a soft drawl that belied the turmoil within. "Miss Elizabeth was always polite," she said, "but politeness ain't the same as seeing someone." Ellis pressed further, inquiring about any grudges, any unusual behavior leading up to the wedding. Clara's eyes flickered to the journal tucked beneath a stack of linens, but she said nothing of it. What Ellis didn't know was that Clara's mind had become a battleground, where memories of her own life intertwined with Eliza's tales. Clara's childhood had been marked by hardship. Her mother, a maid for the Carvers before her, died young from an illness untreated due to lack of care, leaving Clara to fend for herself in a world that valued her labor but not her well-being. She had married briefly, a man who worked the docks, but he vanished one night after a quarrel with Harlan over unpaid wages. Rumors swirled, but nothing was proven. Clara buried her grief, channeling it into her work, but the journal reignited it, transforming sorrow into a quiet fury. In her dreams, Eliza visited her, whispering of vengeance not as destruction, but as reclamation, a way to balance the scales tipped for centuries. The detective's visit stirred something in Clara. That night, she wandered the estate's halls, her footsteps silent on the creaking floors. She paused before a portrait of Harlan's great-grandfather, the plantation owner whose stern eyes seemed to judge her. In that moment, Clara felt a surge of clarity. Her act wasn't madness, but a response to a madness inflicted upon her lineage. The poison, sourced from an old apothecary book hidden in the attic, was symbolic, a tasteless end to a life built on bitter foundations. But as the investigation tightened, Clara sensed the net closing. Harlan, in his study, pored over family records, his face paling as he uncovered discrepancies, funds siphoned subtly over years, perhaps by Clara, to support distant relatives still struggling in the shadows of poverty. Ellis returned the next day with more questions, this time about the vial found discarded in the garden, its residue matching the arsenic. Clara denied knowledge, but her composure cracked ever so slightly, a twitch of the lip, a averted glance. The detective noted it, his suspicions growing, yet he couldn't fathom the depth of Clara's psyche, how her mind had woven a narrative of justice from threads of pain. She wasn't a monster, but a woman whose sanity had been eroded by invisibility, her vengeance a cry from the depths of a fractured soul. As he left, Clara returned to the attic, the journal her only confidant, its pages now stained with her own tears. The estate's secrets began to seep out, like water through cracked foundations. Margaret confessed in private to Harlan about a long-ago affair, but that was merely the surface. Deeper lay the family's unspoken complicity in modern injustices, evictions of tenant farmers, suppression of workers' rights, all echoing the past. Clara knew these truths, had witnessed them, and in her mind Elizabeth's wedding represented the perpetuation of that cycle. By disrupting it, she sought not just revenge, but rupture, a break in the chain that bound her ancestors. As the rain intensified, turning the grounds to mud, Clara stood at the attic window watching the world blur. She felt a strange peace knowing that whatever came next, she had honored Eliza's vow. The investigation would uncover more, peeling back layers of deception, but Clara's story was far from over. Her mind, a tapestry of inherited trauma and personal loss, held keys to revelations that would unsettle everyone involved. The storm that had battered the Carver estate subsided into a drizzling mist, leaving the air heavy and the ground sodden, as if the earth itself wept for the secrets it held. Detective Ellis Thompson returned to the precinct with a nagging sense of unease. The vial from the garden now sealed in evidence, its implications gnawing at him. He spread out the case files on his desk. Photographs of the wedding scene mingled with toxicology reports and preliminary interviews. Elizabeth's fiancé, Thomas Reed, a polished attorney with a firm jaw and evasive eyes, had provided an alibi airtight as a vault. He was mingling with guests when she collapsed. But Ellis detected a flicker of something unspoken in Thomas's demeanor, a hesitation that suggested more than grief. Meanwhile, back at the estate, Clara moved through her chores with mechanical precision, her mind a whirlwind of fragmented memories that blurred the line between her reality and Eliza's shadowed past. As the investigation progressed, Ellis decided to dig deeper into Clara's background, enlisting a researcher to comb through public records. What emerged was a tapestry of quiet endurance. Clara Johnson, born in 1950 in a modest Savannah neighborhood, orphaned young after her mother's untimely death from a neglected ailment. Her father, a laborer on the docks, vanished under mysterious circumstances when Clara was 12, leaving her to be raised by an aunt who worked odd jobs. Clara entered the Carver household at 22, recommended by a family connection, and had remained ever since, loyal, efficient, invisible. But the records hinted at gaps, unexplained absences in the late 1980s, visits to a local clinic for what was vaguely noted as nervous conditions. Ellis wondered if these were the first signs of a mind unraveling under unseen pressures. Clara, sensing the noose tightening, found solace in the estate's library, a room lined with leather-bound volumes that chronicled the Carver lineage. She pulled down a dusty tome on Southern history, its pages detailing the plantation's heyday, complete with inventories of enslaved workers, Eliza among them, listed not by name but as female, age 23, skilled in domestic duties. The impersonal notation fueled Clara's inner turmoil, a reminder that her ancestors were reduced to commodities. In her mind, these books weren't just history. They were indictments, evidence of a debt unpaid. She recalled a conversation overheard years ago, Harlan boasting to guests about the family's resilience through the Civil War, glossing over the human cost. That night, as she shelved the book, Clara's thoughts drifted to her own nervous conditions, episodes where the past intruded on the present, voices whispering like Eliza's from the journal, urging her to act. The detective's next visit to the estate was unannounced, catching the family off guard. Harlan met him at the door, his face a mask of controlled irritation, but Ellis pressed on, requesting access to the staff quarters. Clara's room was sparse, a single bed, a worn dresser, a small window overlooking the fields where her forebears had labored. On the nightstand lay the journal, its cover unassuming, but Ellis's keen eye spotted it. He asked about it casually, and Clara, her voice steady, described it as a family heirloom. But as he flipped through its pages, carefully, respectfully, the weight of its contents settled over him. Eliza's words leaped out, descriptions of daily humiliations, the theft of dignity, the simmering desire for reckoning. Ellis felt a chill. This wasn't just a relic, it was a motive taking shape. In the days that followed, psychological evaluations were suggested for the staff, a routine measure in such cases, but Clara knew it was targeted. She submitted to an interview with Dr. Lydia Grant, a psychiatrist specializing in trauma-related disorders. Seated in a dimly lit office downtown, Clara faced the doctor's probing questions. Dr. Grant, with her gentle tone and notepad, explored Clara's family history, her feelings toward the Carvers. Clara spoke sparingly, but her words revealed cracks. Some chains you can't see, but they pull just the same. The psychiatrist noted signs of complex post-traumatic stress, possibly intergenerational, a phenomenon where the wounds of ancestors echoed in descendants, manifesting as anxiety, dissociation, even delusions of justice. Clara didn't deny it. In her mind, it wasn't delusion but clarity, an inheritance that demanded resolution. Back at the estate, tensions mounted. Margaret, Harlan's wife, began to unravel, her distant gaze turning haunted. In a private moment with Harlan, she confessed fragments of guilt, knowledge of the family's continued exploitation, like underpaying workers or ignoring claims from descendants seeking reparations. Harlan dismissed it, but the seeds of doubt took root. Ellis, piecing together the puzzle, revisited Thomas Reed, pressing him on any anomalies. Thomas admitted to noticing Clara's odd behavior in the weeks prior, lingering stares, muttered words under her breath. But he withheld more. A letter he'd received anonymously, warning of old debts coming due, postmarked from Savannah. Clara's psyche, meanwhile, deepened its entanglement with Eliza's narrative. In quiet moments, she envisioned scenes from the journal. Eliza stealing moments of respite, plotting small acts of defiance like salting the master's food or hiding tools. These visions bled into Clara's reality, justifying her choice of poison. Arsenic, a substance once used in plantations for pest control, symbolic of the toxicity that permeated her world. She hadn't intended for Elizabeth to suffer visibly. The plan was for a quiet fade, mirroring the slow erosion of her own spirit. But the public collapse had amplified the act, turning it into a spectacle that forced the Carvers to confront their blindness. As Ellis compiled his notes, a pattern emerged. Clara's actions weren't impulsive but calculated, rooted in a distorted sense of equity. The journal served as a catalyst, awakening dormant resentments into a compulsion. Dr. Grant's preliminary report suggested dissociative elements, where Clara might have identified so profoundly with Eliza that boundaries blurred, leading to a break from conventional morality. Yet Clara remained composed, her daily routines an anchor amid the storm. She tended the garden, planting seeds in soil enriched by centuries of labor, each act a meditation on legacy. The investigation took a turn when a distant relative of Clara's surfaced, an elderly cousin named Ruth who lived in a nearby town. Ruth, contacted by Ellis, shared stories of family lore, Eliza's unyielding spirit, passed down through oral histories, tales of resistance that inspired but also burdened. Ruth mentioned Clara's fascination with these stories, how she'd visit to discuss them, her eyes alight with a fervor that worried Ruth. She carried the past like a stone, Ruth said, and stones can sink you or be thrown. Ellis nodded, the metaphor resonating. Clara had chosen to throw. In the estate's shadowed corners, Clara prepared for what she sensed was inevitable. She hid the journal anew, but its essence was ingrained in her. The poison vial, though discarded, symbolized a release, a macabre communion with her heritage. As night fell, she stood by her window, the mist outside mirroring the fog in her mind where pain and purpose intertwined. The Carvers, oblivious, mourned in their opulent rooms, but the air hummed with impending revelation. Ellis, driving back to the precinct, felt the case shifting from mere crime to a profound exploration of the human psyche's depths, where history's ghosts demanded audience. The precinct's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like distant thunder, casting harsh shadows on Detective Ellis Thompson's desk as he sifted through the accumulating evidence. The journal of Eliza, now photocopied and filed, lay open before him, its archaic script a bridge to a time when injustices were etched not just in words, but in the very soil of the South. Ellis rubbed his temples, the case evolving from a straightforward poisoning to a labyrinthine exploration of inherited trauma and psychological fracture. He pondered Clara's composure during their encounters, how her eyes held a depth that spoke of burdens carried across lifetimes. Meanwhile, at the Carver estate, the mist had cleared, revealing a sun that seemed mocking in its brightness, illuminating facades that were beginning to crumble under the weight of scrutiny. Clara awoke that morning with a clarity that bordered on detachment, as if the events unfolding were part of a dream scripted by Eliza herself. She prepared breakfast for Harlan and Margaret, the clink of china echoing in the empty dining hall where Elizabeth's wedding had turned to tragedy. Harlan ate in silence, his newspaper unread, while Margaret stared into her coffee, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on the tablecloth. The air was thick with unspoken words, a tension that Clara navigated with the ease of someone long accustomed to reading rooms. She knew the detectives would return. Ruth's interview had likely added fuel to their suspicions, but in her mind, this was not evasion. It was the unfolding of a narrative long overdue, a chance for the past to speak through her actions. Dr. Lydia Grant's report arrived via fax that afternoon, its pages detailing her assessment of Clara. The psychiatrist described a woman whose psyche was a mosaic of resilience and rupture, where intergenerational trauma had manifested as a profound identification with her ancestors' suffering. Ms. Johnson exhibits symptoms consistent with dissociative identity elements, the report noted, wherein the boundaries between self and historical figures blur, leading to actions perceived as restorative justice. Ellis read it twice, the clinical language failing to capture the human element, the quiet dignity in Clara's voice, the subtle defiance in her posture. He decided to confront her again, this time with the report in hand, hoping to pierce the veil of her calm. Arriving at the estate, Ellis found Clara in the parlor, dusting the ornate mantelpiece adorned with family portraits. The room was a shrine to Carver legacy, walls lined with images of stern forebears whose eyes seemed to follow every movement. Clara set down her cloth as Ellis entered, her expression unchanging. He laid out the evidence gently, the vial, the journal, the psychiatric insights. "Clara," he said, his voice measured, "this isn't just about what happened to Elizabeth. It's about what happened to you, to your family." For the first time, a flicker crossed her face, a softening perhaps, or recognition. She sat gesturing for him to do the same, and began to speak in a voice low and steady, weaving a tale that bridged centuries. She recounted her discovery of the journal not as an accident but as a calling. "It found me," she said, "in the attic, buried under layers of forgetting." The entries had resonated with her own experiences, the subtle dismissals, the expectations of servitude masked as employment. Clara described nights spent poring over Eliza's words, how they invaded her dreams, transforming into vivid scenes where she walked in her great-grandmother's shoes. "I felt her pain," Clara continued, "the way it seeped into my bones, making me question if I was living my life or hers." Ellis listened, his notepad forgotten, as Clara delved into the psychological toll, the isolation that bred introspection, the resentment that simmered into conviction. As she spoke, fragments of her plan emerged, not as confessions but as explanations. The choice of arsenic was deliberate, drawn from old plantation records where it was used to control vermin, a metaphor for how the Carvers viewed those beneath them. Clara had acquired it discreetly, through channels obscured by time, mixing it into the wine with hands that trembled not from fear, but from the gravity of the act. It wasn't hate, she clarified, but a need for balance. Elizabeth was the future they cherished, built on our past. Ellis probed gently about remorse, but Clara's response was philosophical. "Remorse implies wrongness. This was reckoning." Her words echoed Dr. Grant's assessment, highlighting a mind where morality was reframed through the lens of historical injustice. Back at the precinct, Ellis conferred with his partner, a seasoned officer named Reyes, who viewed the case through a pragmatic lens. "Sounds like a defense strategy," Reyes mused, pleading insanity rooted in history. But Ellis saw nuance, the way Clara's psyche had adapted to chronic undervaluation, creating a narrative of empowerment amid powerlessness. He requested a deeper dive into the Carver family's records, uncovering documents that revealed ongoing disparities. Lawsuits from former employees dismissed quietly, land disputes with descendants of enslaved families swept under rugs of influence. These findings painted the Carvers not as villains, but as perpetuators of a system that eroded empathy, fostering environments where minds like Clara's could fracture. That evening, Clara wandered the estate's grounds, the setting sun casting long shadows over the fields. She paused at an old oak tree, its bark scarred, a silent witness to generations. In her mind, Eliza stood beside her, their presences merging in a quiet communion. The psychiatric evaluation had labeled it dissociation, but to Clara it was connection, a thread unbroken by time. She reflected on Elizabeth, not with glee but with a somber acknowledgement. The young woman's life, though privileged, was entangled in the same web. Clara's act, in her view, severed a link, forcing acknowledgement where denial had reigned. Harlan, overhearing snippets of the detective's visit from Margaret, confronted Clara in the kitchen later that night. His face flushed with anger, he demanded answers, but Clara met his gaze evenly. "You've always seen what you wanted," she said softly. "Now see the rest." Harlan faltered, memories of his own father's tales surfacing, stories of necessary order that now rang hollow. The encounter left him unsettled, planting seeds of introspection in his rigid worldview. Dr. Grant, contacted by Ellis for clarification, expanded on her report over the phone. She explained how trauma could echo through DNA and stories, altering neural pathways, fostering hypervigilance and altered perceptions of justice. In Clara's case, she said, the mind constructed a reality where vengeance was therapeutic, a release from inherited chains. Ellis nodded, the pieces aligning. Clara's nervous conditions were early indicators, untreated due to societal blind spots escalating into a profound break. As the night deepened, Clara retired to her room, the journal once more in hand. She wrote her own entry, the first in decades chronicling not just events but emotions, the catharsis amid the chaos. The estate slept uneasily, its inhabitants grappling with revelations that challenged foundations. Ellis, driving home, contemplated the human mind's capacity for adaptation, how pain could forge paths unimaginable. The case was nearing a pivot, where truths buried would surface, altering trajectories forever. The precinct's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like distant thunder, casting harsh shadows on the walls where case files piled like forgotten relics. Detective Ellis Thompson sat at his desk, the weight of the Carver investigation pressing on him as he reviewed Dr. Lydia Grant's report once more. It painted a portrait of Clara not as a cold perpetrator, but as a vessel for accumulated sorrow, her mind a mosaic shattered by echoes of trauma that spanned generations. Ellis rubbed his temples, the words blurring. Patient exhibits signs of intergenerational trauma, with dissociative episodes where historical narratives intrude upon present reality. Actions may stem from a perceived moral imperative, blurring vengeance with restitution. He glanced at the journal's photocopies spread before him, Eliza's handwriting a spectral link to the past. Outside, the savannah night hummed with cicadas, their song a reminder that some rhythms persisted unchanged. Back at the estate, Clara awoke from a fitful sleep, her dreams a tangled web of Eliza's life overlaying her own. She saw herself in sepia tones toiling under a relentless sun, the Carver's ancestors looming like giants. Waking, she slipped into the kitchen, the same space where she had prepared the fatal goblet. The counters gleamed under moonlight filtering through lace curtains, but to Clara they whispered accusations. She traced her fingers over the wine rack, remembering the moment she had laced the bottle. A deliberate choice. The arsenic dissolved meticulously, her hands steady despite the tremor in her soul. It wasn't hatred for Elizabeth personally, but for what she represented, the unbroken chain of privilege, a lineage that thrived on the silence of others. The next morning, Ellis arrived with a warrant, his face etched with resolve. Harlan Carver met him at the door, his posture rigid but a flicker of unease betrayed him. "This is harassment," Harlan growled, but Ellis pushed past, heading straight for Clara's quarters. She was there, folding linens with the same quiet efficiency that had defined her tenure. When Ellis informed her of the arrest, citing the vial's fingerprints and trace evidence from the kitchen, Clara didn't resist. Her eyes met his, calm as a still pond, and she nodded as if expecting this culmination. Handcuffs clicked into place, cold against her wrists, but in her mind, they were merely another set of chains, symbolic and fleeting compared to those her ancestors bore. As they drove to the station, Clara gazed out at the passing landscape, fields once worked by enslaved hands, now manicured lawns dotted with historic markers that sanitized the truth. Ellis, glancing in the rear view, attempted conversation. "Why Elizabeth? On her wedding day?" Clara's response was soft, laced with a melancholy wisdom. "Weddings are beginnings, but some beginnings are built on endings that never came. She was the flower of that tree, and the roots were poisoned long ago." Ellis felt a chill. Her words weren't a confession but a philosophy, revealing a psyche where justice was refracted through the prism of history. At the station, Dr. Grant awaited for a formal evaluation, her office a neutral space with soft lighting and abstract art meant to soothe. Clara sat opposite, her posture straight, the journal now in evidence but its essence carried within her. The psychiatrist delved deeper, exploring Clara's identification with Eliza. "Do you feel her presence?" Dr. Grant asked. Clara paused, her gaze distant. not as a ghost but as blood. Her stories are my stories, the theft of self, the demand for repayment. Through hours of dialogue, patterns emerged. Clara's nervous conditions were episodes of depersonalization, where she viewed her life as an extension of Eliza's unfinished narrative. The poisoning, in her view, was a ritualistic act, severing the cycle symbolically on a day of union, mirroring how families like the Carvers perpetuated division. Meanwhile, the Carver family fractured under the revelations. Margaret, unable to contain her turmoil, confided in a close friend about the family's hidden ledgers, documents showing how Harlan had quashed legal claims from descendants of enslaved workers, including Clara's relatives, denying reparations through legal maneuvers. Word leaked to the press, and soon the estate was besieged by reporters, their cameras flashing like accusatory eyes. Harlan retreated to his study, poring over old photographs, his face aging overnight as the veneer of respectability cracked. Thomas Reed, Elizabeth's fiancé, distanced himself, his polished facade crumbling amid whispers of his own family's tangled history. Ellis, observing Clara during interrogation, noted her lack of remorse, not from callousness, but from a profound sense of equilibrium achieved. She described the planning. Weeks of contemplation, the arsenic procured from an antique dealer under the guise of historical interest, dissolved in precise measures to ensure subtlety, but the dose had been miscalculated slightly, leading to the dramatic collapse. In her mind, it was fate intervening, amplifying the message. Dr. Grant's sessions uncovered more. Clara's marriage ending not in abandonment, but in tragedy. Her husband had confronted Harlan over exploitative practices, only to meet an accident on the docks, ruled accidental but suspicious in hindsight. As the evaluation continued, Clara revealed fragments of her inner world. Nights spent reading the journal aloud, as if communing with Eliza, deriving strength from her resilience. She wrote to survive, Clara said, and I acted to honor that survival. The psychiatrist diagnosed a form of trauma-induced psychosis, where reality and inherited memory fused, compelling actions that felt predestined. Yet Clara's lucidity challenged easy labels. She articulated her motives with eloquence, forcing those around her to confront uncomfortable truths about societal debts unpaid. The case drew wider attention, psychologists debating the role of epigenetic trauma, how stress from ancestors could imprint on descendants, altering behavior subtly yet profoundly. Ellis, attending a briefing, felt the shift. This wasn't merely a crime but a symptom of larger fractures in the American psyche, where history's shadows influence the present in unseen ways. Clara, in her cell, found a strange peace, sketching faint outlines of the estate on scrap paper, her mind wandering through time. Harlan, visited by his lawyer, learned of potential civil suits from other families, the poisoning opening floodgates of reckoning. Margaret, in therapy herself, grappled with complicity, her distant demeanor a shield against guilt. Thomas, packing his things, uncovered a note from Elizabeth, expressing vague unease about the family's past, hinting she might have sought change had she lived. As days blurred, Clara's story deepened, her psyche a labyrinth where vengeance was but one path among many. Dr. Grant's report grew, incorporating cultural contexts, suggesting therapy over mere punishment. Ellis, closing his notebook, pondered the ghosts that haunted not just Clara, but the nation, unaddressed legacies demanding voice. The estate stood silent, its grandeur diminished, awaiting the trial that would expose more than one woman's mind. The Savannah courthouse loomed like a sentinel of stone, its columns echoing the grandeur of a bygone era, yet now a stage for unraveling truths that time had tried to bury. As Clara Johnson was led into the arraignment room, her wrists freed from cuffs but her spirit still bound by the weight of her actions, the air hummed with anticipation. Reporters clustered outside, their notebooks poised, cameras flashing intermittently through the windows. Inside, the room was a tableau of contrasts. Harlan Carver, seated rigidly in the gallery, his face a mask of simmering outrage. Margaret beside him, her hands clasped in her lap, eyes downcast as if avoiding the gaze of judgment. Thomas Reed lingered at the back, his presence a reluctant obligation, his mind already distancing from the scandal. Clara, in a simple gray dress provided by her public defender, stood before the judge, her expression serene, as if the proceedings were merely another chapter in a story written long before her birth. The charges were read aloud: first-degree murder, premeditated and with malice aforethought, each word landing like a pebble in a still pond, rippling through the assembled crowd. Clara entered a plea of not guilty, her voice steady, but her attorney, a young man named Marcus Hale with sharp features and a determined glint, hinted at a defense rooted in diminished capacity. "Your Honor," Hale said, "my client has endured profound psychological trauma, compounded by historical injustices that have shaped her mental state." The judge, an older woman with silver-streaked hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, granted bail but set it high, ensuring Clara's return to a holding cell. As she was escorted out, her eyes met Harlan's for a fleeting moment, a silent exchange laden with unspoken histories. In the weeks leading to the trial, the case ballooned into a media spectacle, drawing commentators from across the nation. Psychologists opined on talk shows about the intricacies of intergenerational trauma, citing studies where descendants of Holocaust survivors or enslaved Africans exhibited heightened stress responses, as if pain were encoded in DNA. Dr. Lydia Grant became a key witness, her evaluations of Clara dissected in articles that pondered the line between culpability and compulsion. Clara, from her cell, received letters, some supportive from activists who saw her act as a cry against systemic inequities, others condemnatory, viewing it as unbridled vengeance. She read them all, her mind sifting through the words like Eliza might have sifted through stolen moments of literacy. Hale built the defense meticulously, subpoenaing family records from the Carver estate, unearthing documents that detailed not just the plantation's operations but post-emancipation exploitations, sharecropping schemes that kept families like Clara's in virtual servitude well into the 20th century. One ledger, yellowed and brittle, listed Eliza by name after the war, her wages garnished for debts invented by the Carvers. Hale argued that Clara's immersion in these artifacts had fostered a dissociative state, where she perceived her actions as an extension of ancestral resistance rather than individual crime. Prosecutors countered, portraying Clara as calculating, her choice of arsenic, a poison with historical ties to subtle rebellions on plantations, as evidence of premeditation untethered from madness. Dr. Grant took the stand early in the trial, her testimony a bridge between science and story. Seated in the witness box, she described Clara's sessions. The way Clara spoke of Eliza as a living influence, not hallucination, but internalized guide. "It's akin to cultural memory," Grant explained, "where collective experiences shape individual psyche." Clara's mind constructed a narrative of restitution, blurring temporal boundaries. The jury, a diverse group of Savannah residents, some with ties to the city's complex history, listened intently, their faces reflecting a mix of empathy and skepticism. Harlan, testifying later, denied any knowledge of targeted injustices, his voice booming with indignation, but cross-examination revealed inconsistencies. Emails dismissing claims from Clara's relatives, decisions to evict tenants from ancestral lands now part of the estate's expansion. Clara's own testimony was pivotal. Delivered in a quiet tone that commanded the room's silence, she recounted discovering the journal, how Eliza's words resonated like a call across time. "I didn't see Miss Elizabeth as just herself," Clara said, "but as part of a whole that had taken from us without giving back." She described the planning not as thrill-seeking but as inevitable, a compulsion born from years of swallowed pride and observed disparities. The prosecutor pressed, "Did you regret it?" Clara paused, her eyes distant. Regret implies choice. This felt like fate's hand. The courtroom stirred, whispers rippling as jurors scribbled notes. Outside the courthouse, protests formed. Groups advocating for racial justice clashed with those demanding swift punishment, banners waving under the Georgia sun. The media frenzy amplified every detail: reconstructions of the wedding day, interviews with staff who recalled Clara's unassuming nature, analyses of arsenic's effects that avoided graphic depictions but emphasized its insidious nature. Thomas Reed, called to the stand, spoke of Elizabeth's kindness, but admitted overhearing arguments about family legacy, hinting at Elizabeth's growing discomfort with her inheritance. "She wanted change," he said, "but not like this." Hale introduced expert witnesses, historians who contextualized the Carver legacy, psychologists specializing in trauma who corroborated Grant's findings. One, Dr. Amir Khan, discussed moral injury. The psychological distress from perceiving profound betrayal of ethics extended here to generational scales. Clara's act, Khan posited, was a maladaptive response to unresolved moral wounds inflicted by history. Prosecutors rebutted with their own experts, arguing Clara's lucidity post-arrest indicated full awareness, her composure a sign of remorseless calculation rather than fractured mind. As the trial progressed, Clara's cell became a space of reflection. She sketched timelines on the walls with permitted chalk, lines connecting Eliza's era to her own, dots marking key events, emancipation unfulfilled, her mother's death from neglect, her husband's disappearance. These visualizations anchored her, preventing the dissociation Grant had noted. Visitors were few. Her cousin Ruth, who brought news of community support, and Hale, who prepared her for closing arguments. Ruth shared family stories, reinforcing the bond that had propelled Clara's path. Margaret Carver, in a surprising turn, requested a meeting with Clara, facilitated through attorneys. In a sterile visitation room, Margaret's voice trembled as she spoke of her own awakenings. The guilt of benefiting from unearned privileges, the blindness to Clara's humanity. "I saw you, but I didn't see," Margaret admitted. Clara listened, her response measured. "Seeing now changes little, but it's a start." The encounter, though not admissible, rippled through the family. Harlan withdrew further, his empire crumbling as sponsors pulled from his businesses amid the scandal. The jury deliberated for days, the courthouse a hub of tension. Ellis Thompson, now a spectator, reflected on the case's evolution, from a simple poisoning to a mirror held to society's soul. Clara, awaiting verdict, felt a calm detachment. Her mind's labyrinth navigated, its monsters faced. Whatever the outcome, she had voiced the unspoken, forcing a reckoning that extended beyond the courtroom walls. The jury room was a confined space heavy with the scent of stale coffee and tension, walls adorned with faded posters of civic duty that seemed ironic in the face of the case's complexities. After 4 days of deliberation, the 12 members emerged, their faces etched with exhaustion, filing back into the courtroom where anticipation hung like a veil. The judge called for order, her gavel's rap cutting through the murmurs. Clara sat at the defense table, her hands folded, eyes fixed on a point beyond the proceedings, as if communing with unseen ancestors. Harlan and Margaret occupied their usual seats, his jaw set, her fingers twisting a handkerchief. Thomas Reed was absent, having severed ties with the family amid the scandal's fallout. Reporters leaned forward, pencils poised, sensing the moment's gravity. The foreman, a middle-aged teacher with wire-rimmed glasses, stood to deliver the verdict. "On the charge of first-degree murder," he intoned, "we find the defendant guilty of manslaughter in the second degree." Gasps rippled through the room. A compromise, reflecting the jury's grapple with intent versus impairment. Clara's expression remained unchanged, a stoic mask that concealed the swirl within her mind. Hale, her attorney, nodded subtly, having argued for this lesser charge based on psychological mitigation. The prosecutor, a sharp-featured woman named Elena Vargas, masked her disappointment. She had pushed for full conviction, emphasizing Clara's premeditation as overriding any trauma claims. Sentencing was scheduled for the following month, allowing time for impact statements and further evaluations. In the interim, Clara returned to her cell where the verdict settled over her like a final page turned in Eliza's journal. She felt neither triumph nor defeat, only a sense of closure, as if her act had fulfilled a long-deferred promise. Dr. Grant visited, her sessions now focused on processing the outcome. "How does this feel?" Grant asked. Clara pondered, her voice soft. "Like rain after drought. The ground is soaked, but seeds might grow." Grant noted progress. Clara's dissociative episodes lessened, replaced by reflective insight, suggesting therapy's potential to untangle the knots of her psyche. The verdict sparked nationwide discourse, op-eds dissecting the intersection of mental health and historical injustice. Activists hailed it as acknowledgement of systemic trauma's role in behavior, while critics decried it as excusing criminality. The Carver estate became a symbol. Tours canceled, its gates locked as Harlan faced mounting lawsuits from descendants seeking redress. He hired investigators to probe his own family's past, unearthing more uncomfortable truths. Letters from the 1920s showing Carver's suppressing union efforts among black workers, patterns of disenfranchisement that echoed into Clara's era. Harlan's health declined, his once commanding presence diminished as if the revelations sapped his vitality. Margaret, in contrast, sought transformation. She established a foundation in Elizabeth's name, funding scholarships for descendants of enslaved people, including Clara's relatives. In a letter to Clara, read during visitation, Margaret wrote of awakening, "Your story forced me to see the invisible threads binding us. I can't undo the past, but I can weave differently." Clara read it multiple times, her response a simple nod during their next meeting, a bridge tentatively extended across divides. Ellis Thompson. The detective reflected on the case in his final report, noting how it transcended typical investigations. This wasn't just about poison, he wrote, but about the toxins of unresolved history seeping into the present. He pursued further training in trauma-informed policing, influenced by Dr. Grant's insights. The media frenzy subsided gradually, but documentaries and books emerged, exploring Clara's story as a lens on America's lingering shadows. In prison, Clara participated in group therapy, sharing fragments of her narrative with inmates who nodded in recognition. Many carried their own burdens of inherited pain. She began writing, not a journal like Eliza's, but letters to her cousin Ruth, detailing reflections on morality's fragility. "The mind bends under weight," she wrote, "but it can also straighten given space." Ruth shared these with community groups, fostering dialogues on healing. As sentencing approached, Hale prepared arguments for leniency, citing Clara's lack of prior record and the psychiatric consensus on her condition. Vargas countered with victim impact, Harlan's statement a litany of loss, Elizabeth's unfulfilled potential, the family's shattered peace. Yet even Harlan's words carried a hint of introspection, acknowledging the estate's role in fostering resentment. The judge, reviewing all, sentenced Clara to 10 years, with possibility of parole after 5, mandating continued therapy. Clara accepted the sentence with grace, her mind now a quieter realm, where Eliza's voice was a companion rather than commander. The courtroom emptied, but the echoes lingered, questions of justice, the psyche's depths, and society's debts. Outside, under a sky streaked with clouds, life continued, but for those touched by the case, perspectives shifted irrevocably, a subtle realignment toward understanding the unseen forces shaping human actions. The prison gates clanged shut behind Clara as she stepped into the general population wing, the sound reverberating like a final punctuation on her old life. The Georgia State Correctional Facility was a labyrinth of concrete and steel, its corridors echoing with distant voices and the shuffle of feet. Clara, now inmate number 92745, carried a small bundle of belongings, a few changes of clothes, a toothbrush, and tucked carefully among them, a photocopy of Eliza's journal, granted as a personal item after Hale's petition. The pages, though replicated, held the same weight, their words a talisman against the isolation ahead. Her cell was sparse, a bunk bed shared with a quiet woman named Lena, who nodded in greeting but asked no questions. Clara settled in, her mind adapting to the rhythm of incarceration, meals at set times, lights out by 9, the constant hum of surveillance. In the early days, Clara's thoughts often wandered back to the estate, imagining its rooms now empty of celebration, Harlan pacing the halls like a ghost of his former self. She learned through Ruth's visits that the Carver Foundation had gained traction, sponsoring educational programs that delved into Savannah's hidden histories, workshops where descendants shared stories much like Eliza's. Margaret had even visited the prison once, under the guise of charitable work, their conversation brief but poignant. "We're naming a scholarship after your great-grandmother," Margaret said, her voice tentative. Clara's response was measured. Names matter, but actions more. It was a small bridge, fragile but standing, hinting at possibilities beyond vengeance. Dr. Grant continued her sessions via video link, the screen a window into Clara's evolving psyche. They explored the aftermath, how the act, once consummated, left a void where compulsion had resided. "Do the voices still come?" Grant inquired. Clara shook her head. "Not voices, but memories. Clearer now, like water after the mud settles." Grant diagnosed improvement, the dissociation fading, replaced by integrative therapy where Clara narrated her life as a continuum, acknowledging pain without letting it dictate. She recommended group sessions within the prison, where women from similar backgrounds shared tales of resilience, fostering a sense of community that Clara had long lacked. Outside, the ripples extended further. Ellis Thompson, promoted for his handling of the case, lectured at police academies on cultural sensitivity in investigations, using Clara's story as a case study without naming her. Trauma isn't an excuse, he'd say, but ignoring it blinds us to motives. His words influenced policy shifts, subtle at first, more training on historical contexts, partnerships with mental health experts. The media, too, evolved their coverage. A documentary series featured Clara's case alongside others, exploring how societal fractures manifest in individual breakdowns, garnering awards for its nuanced approach. Harlan Carver, isolated in his estate, grappled with his own reckoning. Health issues confined him to a wheelchair, his days spent reviewing family archives with a hired historian. Discoveries mounted, correspondences revealing Carver's roles in Jim Crow-era suppressions, investments in companies that perpetuated inequalities. He began anonymous donations, funneling funds to reparations groups, his actions a silent atonement. Margaret, empowered by the foundation, traveled to conferences, speaking on privilege's blind spots, her transformation a beacon for others in her circle. Thomas Reed, having relocated to Atlanta, rebuilt his life, but the shadow lingered. He authored an article for a legal journal, anonymizing details on the ethics of inheritance, questioning how one benefits from tainted legacies. It sparked debates in academic circles, influencing curricula on restorative justice. Clara, hearing of it through Ruth, felt a quiet satisfaction. Her act, though tragic, had seeded change. In prison, Clara found unexpected purpose. She volunteered in the library, organizing books on history and psychology, recommending titles to inmates seeking understanding of their own paths. Lena, her cellmate, opened up over time, a story of domestic cycles mirroring Clara's themes of inherited pain. They discussed Eliza's journal late into the night, Lena's interest sparking Clara to transcribe more family lore, creating a makeshift archive passed hand to hand. Ruth's visits brought news of the world, community centers naming rooms after Eliza, schools incorporating the case into lessons on empathy and equity. Clara's letters to Ruth grew philosophical, pondering the mind's capacity for both destruction and healing. The poison was in me, she wrote, but flushing it out cleared the way. Grant praised this insight, noting Clara's progress toward parole eligibility. As months turned to years, Clara's psyche mended thread by thread. Dreams shifted from hauntings to hypotheticals. What if dialogues had preceded actions? She participated in restorative justice programs, writing letters to the Carvers, not of apology but explanation, fostering understanding over absolution. Harlan responded once, his handwriting shaky, "We all carry chains." It was an acknowledgement, a crack in the wall. The estate, now a historical site under the Foundation's management, hosted tours emphasizing full narratives, slavery's scars alongside architectural beauty. Visitors left reflective, the story of Clara and Elizabeth a cautionary tale woven into the fabric. Ellis, visiting Clara during a review, shared how the case altered his worldview. "You made us see," he said. Clara nodded, her calm a testament to inner peace. The prison walls, once oppressive, became a space for introspection. Her mind no longer a battlefield but a garden, where seeds of reckoning bloomed quietly. Years folded into one another within the prison's unyielding structure, each day a measured step in Clara's journey through the corridors of her mind and the confines of her environment. The facility's routine had become a familiar cadence: morning counts, work assignments in the laundry where steam and suds blurred the lines between labor and penance, evenings spent in the common area where conversations drifted like smoke. Clara, now in her late 40s, moved with a purposeful grace, her once guarded demeanor softened by time and introspection. The photocopied journal lay on her bunk, its edges worn from frequent handling, but now it served not as a spark for fury, but as a chronicle to learn from, a map of where pain had led and where healing might begin. Lena, her cellmate, had become a confidant, their late-night dialogues evolving from shared histories to aspirations for futures unmarred by past shadows. Parole hearings loomed every few months after the 5-year mark, each one a theater of evaluation where Clara presented her transformed self. Hale, still her advocate though pro bono now, prepared meticulously, submitting reports from Dr. Grant that charted her progress. Reduced symptoms of dissociation, increased emotional regulation, active participation in restorative programs. In one hearing, Clara spoke eloquently before the board, a panel of stern faces softened by her words. "I've carried stories not my own," she said, "but now I write my ending." The board noted her involvement in a prison writing workshop, where she mentored others in articulating their traumas, turning personal narratives into tools for empathy. Denial came twice, citations of the crime's severity, but Clara persisted, her resilience echoing Eliza's unyielding spirit. Outside, the world had shifted in subtle ways influenced by her case. The Carver Foundation expanded, partnering with universities for research on intergenerational trauma, funding studies that blended psychology with history. Margaret, now leading it full-time, authored a book, a memoir interwoven with Eliza's excerpts and Clara's story, anonymized but resonant. It climbed bestseller lists, sparking book clubs where readers grappled with themes of accountability. Harlan, in his final years, passed quietly, his will allocating portions of the estate to reparations, a posthumous gesture that made headlines. The property itself transformed into a museum, exhibits detailing the full spectrum of its history, from enslavement to modern reckonings, with a room dedicated to personal stories like Clara's. Ruth visited monthly, bringing photographs of family gatherings, news of scholarships awarded in Eliza's name. One visit, she shared a letter from a young scholar studying Clara's case for a thesis on psychiatric manifestations of social injustice. "You're teaching them," Ruth said, her eyes bright. Clara smiled faintly, the expression reaching her eyes for the first time in years. These connections bridged the prison walls, reminding her that her act, though isolating, had woven her into a larger tapestry of change. In therapy with Grant, now in person during approved sessions, they delved into forgiveness, not as absolution for others, but self-compassion. The mind holds grudges like roots, Clara reflected, but uprooting them frees the soil. Prison life offered unexpected avenues for growth. Clara joined a horticulture program, tending gardens that supplied the facility's kitchen. Her hands in the earth, planting seeds that sprouted under careful nurture, mirrored her internal work. She thought of the estate's fields, once symbols of oppression, now reframed as places of potential renewal. Inmates sought her counsel, drawn to her quiet wisdom. One, a young woman named Sophia, shared parallels of familial cycles of abuse, and Clara guided her through journaling, echoing her own path with the heirloom pages. The third parole hearing arrived on a crisp autumn day, the air outside hinting at freedom's scent. Hale presented a dossier thick with endorsements, from Grant, praising Clara's integration, from the Foundation, offering employment upon release, from Ruth, vouching for community support. Clara testified, her voice steady, recounting lessons learned, the danger of unchecked pain, the power of dialogue over destruction. The board deliberated briefly, granting parole with conditions, continued therapy, community service. As the decision was read, Clara felt a release not just of body but spirit, the chains of her psyche loosening further. Transitioning to the outside world was a deliberate process. Ruth welcomed her into a modest home in Savannah's outskirts, the space filled with family artifacts, including originals of Eliza's writings returned from evidence. Clara took a position at the museum, guiding tours with a narrative that balanced horror with hope, her presence a living exhibit. Visitors listened rapt as she spoke of the mind's fragility, how history's echoes could distort reality, urging reflection on personal legacies. Margaret met her there one day, their conversation in the garden a full circle, acknowledgments exchanged, a tentative alliance formed in shared pursuit of understanding. Ellis Thompson, retired now, attended one of Clara's talks, approaching afterward with a nod of respect. "You've turned poison into medicine," he said. Clara inclined her head, recognizing the metaphor's depth. Her evenings were spent writing a manuscript, not for publication but catharsis, detailing the psychiatric journey from fracture to wholeness. Dr. Grant reviewed drafts, noting themes of resilience that could inform future cases. As Clara walked Savannah's streets, the city's moss-draped oaks whispered of continuity. She visited Elizabeth's grave once, leaving flowers without words, a silent gesture toward peace. Her mind, once a storm, now harbored calm waters where reflections of the past informed but no longer drowned the present. Connections deepened, with Sophia released and thriving, with scholars citing her story in papers on mental health equity. The ripples continued, her life a testament to the human capacity for transformation amid the shadows of history. The Savannah sun dipped low on the horizon, casting elongated shadows across the museum grounds that had once been the Carver estate, transforming the landscape into a canvas of golden hues and lingering memories. Clara stood at the edge of the garden, her fingers brushing against the petals of newly planted roses, varieties chosen for their resilience, much like the stories she now shared with visitors. It had been 2 years since her release, and the world outside prison walls had unfolded in ways both predictable and profound. Her days a blend of routine and revelation. The museum bustled with activity, school groups on field trips, historians poring over archives, families seeking connections to their roots. Clara's role had expanded from guide to curator of personal narratives, her insights shaping exhibits that wove individual psyches with broader historical threads. She often paused before a display case holding Eliza's original journal, now preserved under glass, its pages a bridge between eras, reminding her of how far the mind could travel from darkness to light. In quiet moments, Clara reflected on the psychiatric journey that had redefined her. Dr. Grant's sessions, now monthly check-ins, delved into the subtleties of sustained recovery, how the mind, once fractured by trauma's weight, could rebuild with intentional scaffolding. "You've integrated the shadows," Grant observed during one visit, her notebook filled with notes on Clara's progress. Clara nodded, describing how dissociation had given way to mindfulness, episodes of historical immersion now voluntary recollections rather than involuntary intrusions. She practiced techniques learned in prison, breathing exercises to anchor in the present, journaling to process emotions without judgment. These tools had become second nature, allowing her to navigate days when memories surged, like anniversaries of the wedding or her arrest, without being overwhelmed. The community around Clara had grown, a network of support that mirrored the interconnectedness she once sought through vengeance. Ruth hosted gatherings where family members shared oral histories, Clara contributing tales from Eliza's era, blended with her own experiences. One evening, under a canopy of stars, a young relative named Maya, studying psychology, asked about the turning point. "It was realizing the poison hurt me more," Clara replied, her voice carrying the wisdom of hindsight. Maya, inspired, pursued research on trauma's epigenetic markers, citing Clara's case in papers that argued for holistic approaches to mental health in marginalized communities. These interactions reinforced Clara's sense of purpose, her psyche finding fulfillment in mentoring, turning personal pain into communal healing. Unexpected alliances formed, further enriching Clara's world. Margaret Carver, now a close collaborator at the museum, co-led workshops on reconciliation, their partnership a living example of bridging divides. In one session, attended by descendants from both sides of history, Margaret shared her evolution, from oblivious beneficiary to active ally, while Clara discussed the psychiatric toll of suppressed narratives. Participants left with tools for self-examination, many reporting shifts in their own mental landscapes. Thomas Reed, having read Margaret's book, reached out via letter, expressing regret for his detachment and offering legal aid to the foundation pro bono. Clara met him once in a neutral cafe, their conversation tentative but honest, closing loops of unresolved tension. The media's interest resurfaced periodically, documentaries updating Clara's story as a beacon of transformation. One filmmaker focused on the psychiatric angle, interviewing Grant and Clara about the mind's plasticity, how therapy, combined with societal acknowledgement, could rewire neural pathways scarred by trauma. Clara's on-camera presence was composed, her words measured. "The human mind is like this land, fertile, but it needs tending to yield something good." The film premiered at festivals, sparking dialogues in academic circles and online forums, where viewers debated the ethics of vengeance versus justice, many crediting Clara's journey with broadening their perspectives on mental health. Challenges persisted, testing Clara's resilience. Flashbacks occasionally surfaced, triggered by scents of wine or sounds of bells, remnants of the wedding day etched in her subconscious. She countered them with Grant's strategies, reframing them as echoes rather than commands. Socially, not all welcomed her reintegration. Whispers in town, anonymous letters decrying her freedom. Yet Clara viewed these as opportunities for growth, engaging in community dialogues to address misconceptions about psychiatric conditions and criminal justice. Her advocacy extended to policy, testifying before local committees on the need for trauma-informed care in prisons, her voice joining a chorus pushing for reform. Personal milestones marked her progress. Clara moved into a small cottage near Ruth's, furnishing it with items symbolizing renewal, a bookshelf lined with psychology texts, a garden plot where she grew herbs once associated with healing in Eliza's time. She began a correspondence with Sophia, her former inmate mentee, who had started a support group for released women. Their letters exchanged insights on maintaining mental equilibrium amid life's uncertainties, Sophia crediting Clara's guidance with her own stability. In quieter pursuits, Clara explored art therapy, sketching scenes from her dreams, abstract representations of chains dissolving into vines, symbols of liberation. As the museum prepared for an anniversary exhibit, Clara uncovered a new artifact, a letter from Harlan's effects, written but unsent, acknowledging the family's debts and expressing a wish for dialogue. Reading it, Clara felt a final layer of burden lift, her mind achieving a profound equilibrium. She included it in the display, captioning it as evidence of unspoken potentials for change. Visitors responded deeply, many sharing their own stories of internal conflicts resolved through confrontation. Ellis Thompson, in retirement, became a regular at the museum, their conversations evolving into friendship. Over coffee, he shared how the case had inspired his memoirs, focusing on the detective's role in uncovering not just crimes but contexts. Clara, in turn, revealed ongoing reflections, the realization that vengeance, while a response to pain, ultimately perpetuated cycles, whereas understanding broke them. Her psyche, once a vessel for ancestral rage, now harbored empathy, a testament to the mind's capacity for profound shift. Evenings found Clara walking the grounds, the setting sun a daily reminder of endings and beginnings. She pondered the inexplicable ways history intertwined with the individual soul, how a single act could ripple into waves of transformation. With each step, she felt connected, not just to Eliza, but to a future where minds like hers could find peace without destruction. The horizon stretched endless, promising horizons yet unexplored, her story an enduring enigma in the tapestry of human experience. The savannah dusk settled over the former Carver estate, now a museum thrumming with the weight of its stories, where Clara stood before a gathered crowd in the garden, the roses she had planted blooming under the soft glow of string lights. It was the 10th anniversary of the museum's opening, a milestone marked by an exhibit unveiling, a collection of narratives from descendants of enslaved people, woven with Clara's own reflections displayed alongside Eliza's journal. Her voice, steady and resonant, carried over the audience as she concluded her speech. The mind is a garden, capable of both thorns and blossoms. It can harbor vengeance or cultivate peace, depending on the seeds we choose to sow. The crowd, a mix of locals, scholars, and visitors from afar, applauded, their faces reflecting awe and introspection. Clara's journey, from the shadows of a fractured psyche to a beacon of reconciliation, had become a touchstone for those grappling with their own hidden histories. You, who have followed this journey through the labyrinth of Clara's mind, have dared to peer into the abyss where pain and purpose collide. Congratulations for staying until the end, for braving the unsettling truths that lurk beneath the surface of human experience. You're part of a select group, one that doesn't shy away from the dark tunnels of the psyche or the haunting echoes of history. Clara's story, rooted in the raw complexities of trauma and retribution, reveals the fragility of the human mind, how it can bend under centuries of unaddressed wrongs, yet also mend through understanding and choice. It's a tale that challenges us to question, what invisible chains do we carry and how do we break them without breaking ourselves? Now let's make this journey resonate further. In the comments below, share the phrase, "This story changed my way of seeing the human mind," or write what this tale stirred in you. Perhaps a new perspective on justice, a reflection on your own history, or a question about the shadows we inherit. By doing so, You join a community of truth seekers, those who dare to unravel the inexplicable and confront what others leave untold. Your words will signal to others that you're part of this fearless pursuit, amplifying the conversation around the mysteries of the human soul. This story's power lies not just in its telling, but in its sharing. Pass this video along to someone who craves the enigmatic, who is drawn to the strange and profound. By spreading it, you're planting seeds in a world often blind to its own scars, helping others see the delicate balance between destruction and healing. Subscribe to this channel, like a lantern in a storm, guiding you to more stories that peel back the layers of the human condition. Each video is a step deeper into the unknown, a chance to unravel the sinister, the strange, and the deeply human. Clara's act was a cry from the depths, a poisoned chalice that forced a reckoning, not just for her, but for a society grappling with its past. Her mind, once a storm of inherited pain, became a testament to resilience, showing that even the darkest paths can lead to light, if we dare to walk them. Keep watching, keep questioning, and keep seeking the truths that lie hidden in the shadows. The human mind is a mystery waiting for you to explore. Will you take the next step?